All right. Buckle up, guys. We got a long one today. This is probably the most requested tutorial that we've ever had here on YouTube, and the reason why it's taken us so long to do is because for the most part, most of our tutorials are somewhere in maybe the 8 to 12 minute range. Sometimes when we have a really detailed one, we pump it up to about 18 to 20 minutes or so. But multi-layer stencils, what we're talking about today, there was no way for us to condense this down into the 10-minute range or the 20-minute range. So this is the longest video that we've ever put out tutorial-wise, and it's a really good one. Now, this is what I would call not beginner stage type stuff. This is intermediate to advanced level skill required to do this. You do need to know a little bit of Photoshop. You hopefully have a little bit of experience, maybe cutting out vinyl, working with something like Silhouette Studio, because today we're going to be using two programs to actually make the multi-layer stencils. We're going to be using Photoshop to separate everything in the actual stencil or the logo itself into different layers and cut stencils out of that. Hence a multi-layer stencil. What we're trying to do is take our image, take all of the colors, put them on separate layers, and create a stencil of each of the colors to create a multi-layer stencil. That's what this entire thing is about. So also, if you're wondering, I'm going to be using Silhouette Studio. It's free software that comes when you purchase a Silhouette cutter. I use a Silhouette Cameo 3. I've also used a Silhouette Cameo 2 in the past. I would say, I think in October and November, they released a Silhouette Cameo 4, so that's the newest one out there. A lot of people also like to use a Cricut cutter. I believe those are available at a lot of craft stores like Michael's or Hobby Lobby. I haven't used those, but if you're wondering, you could pretty much follow the same steps. A lot of the presets that come kind of installed within the software for telling you what to have your blade settings at when cutting vinyl, those will work. I'm ranting too much. We got a long tutorial ahead. Let's go ahead and dive right in. So here we have a top-down view of our Air Force One. This is where we're going to be doing the artwork on the toe box. And I'm going to go ahead and turn on our Marilyn Monroe layer. This is what we're ultimately trying to create. But on a scale of 1 to 10, the complexity of this image itself, creating a stencil from it, is a little bit above a 1. And I want to start at a 1 to really show you guys the technique of blocking out a multi-layer stencil. So I'm going to start with something incredibly easy, like if we were to do this Chicago Bulls logo. It has 3 colors. The gray is just an outline that I added here. It's not actually part of the logo, but it's something that I might actually do to create a little bit of separation if we wanted the rest of that toe box to be red. So now I'm going to go ahead over to a new page where we have the Bulls logo, and I'm going to go ahead and start to show you how we would separate the colors on individual layers in order to then trace those out as individual stencils, hence creating a multi-layered stencil. Now that we have our Bulls logo pulled up, the first thing that we need to do is get all of our main colors on separate layers. So what I mean by that is we need to get our red on its own layer, our black on its own layer, and our white on its own layer. There's a million different ways that you could do selections like this in Photoshop, but when we're working with a nice flat image like this where there's no shading within the red or black or white or anything like that, a quick, easy way that I'm going to do is the select color range. So we're going to go ahead, use the color picker, select our black. You could play with this fuzziness slider a little bit, and that's going to determine how much of the red it's actually picking up. Something like that looks good. Then I'm going to go ahead and do a layer via copy. We're going to name this red. Then we're going to go ahead and do those same exact steps with our white and our black also. See, for the white, it's picking up a little bit of the outside silhouette of the character itself. We don't want that, so I'm going to turn down the fuzziness slider a little bit. Again, layer via copy, and let's go ahead and name this white. Select color range, color picker, select the color black somewhere on the logo, and let's name this layer black. Now, that's essentially all you need to do in order to get all of the colors on their own layers, which you can then create stencils from. But I think I will be able to give you a pretty cool visual demonstration of how you would actually go about laying down vinyl. So I'm going to go ahead and show you all of these on their own separate layers and what they would look like. I'm just going to stretch out our canvas a little bit. Pull each one off to the side. And now you can see each of the colors are on their own separate layer, and each of them essentially would be their own separate stencil. I'm going to put them all under a group real quick, and let's convert that to black. And now essentially this is what you would be trying to print out, the 3 different colors of the logo, and you would be utilizing vinyl to cover up different colors and then spraying different colors in between. So that's what I'm going to try to walk you through now. So let's go ahead, go a few steps back, and let's go ahead and create the silhouette of the original logo itself, just for demonstration purposes. So if I turn off all of our other layers, you can see here we have just the silhouette. Now what I'm going to do is select the background of the silhouette, and let's go ahead and paint that black on a new layer, and let's call this background cover up. Now if we go back to our original image where we have the Bulls logo up against the red on the toe box, let's assume we already painted our toe box red. That was part of the design. Let's create a new layer, and we're just going to go ahead and paint that completely red. And let's call this our red toe box. Now, since our toe box is red and we want to keep everything in the background red, we're going to go ahead and add vinyl around that, and that's what this background cover-up layer is. So everything you're looking at that is black right now on the screen, you could assume that is a piece of vinyl that we cut out, and we would be placing that on the toe box, and then now we would be able to work inside of there and do the actual logo. So everything that's black right now is vinyl covered up on the toe box, and everything that's in the empty negative space is going to be what we're going to then paint with the logo. Since we already have a red toe box, we also don't want to repaint anything in the logo that's red. So on our red layer, let's go ahead and create a duplicate of it, and I'm going to call this red cover up vinyl. Now if we change this color to black, this would also essentially be vinyl on our toe box, because we don't need to paint anything that's going to be red in the logo red again, since we already have that as part of our toe box. So everything that's in the negative space now, the only things left would be to paint what needs to be white in there and then what needs to be black, which is essentially the outline. So let's pretend that we painted everything white inside of that negative space. I'm going to use our color selection, pick the color white, and now let's say we painted all of that white. Cool, now we need to cover up everything that's white that we want to stay white. So we go to our white layer, I'm going to create a duplicate of it, and we're going to go ahead and call that our white cover up vinyl. Now let's go ahead and change this to black also. And now everything that's black again is essentially vinyl. We've done this with 2 steps so far. We covered up everything that was red, then we painted white. Now we've covered up everything that we want to stay white, and now we just need to spray our black. So everything that you're seeing that's white on the screen right now is our last step. We would be spraying all of that black, and then we would have a clean outline for the logo. And the last little thing that you could do that you saw me, just for demonstration purposes, show on our original toe box is I might do something like add a gray outline around it also. This is also a good idea just in case any portion of the actual black within the logo itself doesn't come out as clean as you would like. Alright, now that we've got that one out of the way, let's go ahead and move on to our Marilyn Monroe logo. So like I said, this one is a little bit harder. It's not as cut and dry as doing something like the Bulls logo. Ultimately, it requires a little bit more finesse with creating all of the colors on their own individual layers. So if we go over to our original mock-up image, you'll see that we have the background completely pink. So we're going to start with that in our Marilyn Monroe image. So again, we're going to do a select color range, and I'm going to select the color pink. We could play with our fuzziness slider, but what you'll see that we're missing here is some edges of the eyebrows. So what we then need to do is take something like our polygonal lasso tool and press on Shift to do an add selection. And then we're going to go ahead and zoom in and just start adding some of those things in. Now if we look down here by her mouth, you'll see that a lot of it didn't get picked up because most of the lips are actually done in black here, but since we would be laying down the pink first and then covering all that up with the black, I still need all of that selected on the initial layer. So we're going to go ahead and make sure that we have the entire portion of the lips selected. So now you can see we have everything selected. I'm going to do a color overlay just to turn all of that to our initial pink. Let's make sure I have that selected somewhere. So what I'm going to do now is toggle between two layers, one that I have called additional selection and another that is called initial color selection. And you'll be able to see what happens when you actually go in and finesse this a little bit and making sure that you're getting everything selected. If we would have just done a simple select color range, here's what we would have ended up with. We wouldn't be getting all of the eyebrow. So it takes a little bit more time because you have to have that attention and detail to actually go back in and make sure you're getting everything selected that you want. Now let's go ahead and name that pink and let's move on to our skin tone layer. Select color range, let's pick that skin tone, and that looks pretty good. Layer via copy, whoops. And let's name that skin tone layer. Turn that off and here you can see that. Now let's go ahead and do that with the yellow of the hair. There's also a little bit of yellow within the eyes also, so I didn't even catch that right away. Let's go ahead and name this our yellow layer. And then our last one is going to be our black layer. Select color range, pick one of the dark blacks, turn up the fuzziness slider, and layer via copy, and let's call this black. Now we have all four of our colors on their own layer, the black, the pink, the skin tone, and the yellow. So if we turn each of these off, you'll start to see with just the black, we have a pretty cool looking silhouette. You can definitely still tell who that is, but once we start to add in the skin tone and the hair color, now we're really gonna have that Andy Warhol type look. So same thing that we talked about when doing the Bulls logo. In this case, we already have a pink painted toe box. So anything in the end design that we want to be pink, we don't need to repaint pink inside the logo. So we're gonna cover up everything that's pink that you're seeing on the screen right now with vinyl first. To cover that up, once we peel that back, then we have pink underneath. Now, before we go ahead and separate each of these individual layers and load them into our stencil cutting software, I'm gonna show you guys a quick demonstration on why there is one more step. So once you're placing down your stencil to lay, let's say like the color black, here's what happens if you're off by a little bit. You wouldn't want that to happen, right? Because now all of a sudden the stencil doesn't work. So how do you know where you're gonna be placing it? Well, here's one little secret sauce technique that I have for you guys. We are going to create a new layer. I'm gonna select a hard brush and we are going to create a little dot that we are going to copy onto every single layer. And I'm just gonna place it basically on the top of her forehead. I have my opacity turned down too low, so we're gonna turn that up. We're gonna place a dot right in the center of her forehead. This is actually what I would consider the most important and critical step in the entire process, utilizing this reference dot. This is a step that if you skip over and you shift any of your stencils even slightly, it could really mess up the entire image. So this is something that you probably won't see in other videos. This is a technique that I developed kind of myself to just really help me, and something that really comes to you after you start doing this for a lot of years. So really take the time to try to understand why this is happening. It probably looks really weird at first, but I promise it's gonna start to make more sense. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and copy this dot onto every single layer. Let's copy it 4 times so that every one of them has it. And now we are going to know where to place our vinyl because we're gonna be placing it smack dab center on that dot. Even though we have the entire silhouette of the character covered up, you still could be off a little bit by placing, you know, the hair layer or the black layer, and any little shift is going to be noticeable once you peel back all this vinyl. So this little dot is going to tell you, hey, place my stencil here. So we're going to make sure we have one of these placed onto every single layer, and it's going to look a little weird at first. It probably doesn't make a lot of sense now, but once we actually get into the painting, I promise you, it'll start to make sense. So real quickly, you can see on our yellow layer, we have the yellow hair and this black dot. Same thing with our skin tone, we have this black dot. Same thing for our pink layer, we have this black dot, and it's in the same exact spot on every single one. And now we're gonna know where to place those. All right, we're just about ready to move on into Silhouette Studio. So let's go ahead and stretch out our canvas. We're gonna move each of these layers into different directions. There's no specific order really. But now you can see each of the different colors are in a completely different zone, and we need to convert all of them to black, because any stencil cutting software, like I said, it doesn't read color. It only reads black and white, and that's how it knows where to cut. There we go. So we have Marilyn Monroe with a dot in our forehead, but you'll see on our skin tone layer, our dot got covered up. So what we need to do there is I'm going to undo that, and we need to have that dot deleted from the skin tone layer. I'm going to delete that. Now let's go ahead and convert everything to black again. And now you'll see on that skin tone layer, the dot is missing there, but we'll still know where to place it. So let's go ahead and save this as a PNG. Now we have our image loaded here into Silhouette. We are going to go to our trace tool, and I'm going to do a select trace area, and we're going to play with our scale. I like to turn that down always. There's never a time I don't turn it all the way down to 4. And then here's where you could play with the threshold slider a little bit. I'm going to do something like, it starts off at 45. I usually turn it up to about 50 or so. We're going to select trace and pull our cut lines off to the side. Perfect. Now here you can see we have our skin tone stencil, our pink stencil, our yellow for the hair stencil, and then our black stencil. The next thing that I'm going to do is measure out the exact height I want from the bottom neck of Marilyn Monroe to the top of her head. This way I know how big to tell the stencil cutting software to cut it out. So I'm going to take my ruler, measure it out, and it looks like I want it to be about 2 inches or so. That looks pretty good, and it's gonna fill up most of the toe box, and I wanna make it as big as possible on there. So we're going to scale this down until we have the bottom portion of her neck, like I said, to the top of her hair as about 2 inches. That looks pretty good. We're just about ready to send this to our vinyl cutter. If we go over to our send settings, some of the presets that Silhouette Studio already has work great, like vinyl glossy as the material. That works good. Assuming you're working with a relatively fresh blade, you can use the settings that they already have preset. A 1 on your actual physical blade. The presets are a speed of 5 and a force of 10. As your blade starts to dull out over time, you can up the force and it'll still cut through vinyl just fine. And you could also turn it up from 1 to 2 by actually physically turning on the blade. But this is what you do over time as your blade starts to dull out, and you'll notice your lines aren't cutting out as good. So I'm working with a pretty good blade, so we're going to use the presets of 1, 5, and 10. For a project like this, since I want these lines to come out as crispy as possible, I'm going to be using FDC 3700 glitter vinyl. This stuff is strong, and if you do not take the time to prep your shoes, you do not allow a serious amount of dry time, it is going to peel up your paint, and it is going to be an absolute nightmare. You're going to get the tightest lines with any vinyl with this stuff, but you run a very high risk of pulling up paint with if you don't really take the time to prep your shoes. I can't warn you guys enough how strong this vinyl is. it's gonna hurt your project if you did not take the time to sand down your surface, apply really thin coats. I just want to warn you guys. But if you take the time to do all that and you want some really tight lines, go for it. But if you want to use a good everyday vinyl that you've seen me use countless times here on YouTube also, my go-to kind of everyday vinyl is going to be the white Oracal 811. So that's definitely what I recommend unless you have a lot of experience doing this. Now I'm ready to go ahead and actually cut out some of the vinyl, and we're gonna go ahead and place it onto one of these cutting mats. So since our top to bottom of the logo itself was gonna be 2 inches, what I'm gonna do is cut about 3 inches, leave a little bit of room on the top and bottom for the actual logo. I like to always take one of these squeegee-esque tools also that Silhouette makes and just go ahead and rub down the vinyl. This is a really old mat that's been through a lot, so it's no longer as sticky as it once was, so I'm also going to go ahead and tape it down. That step wouldn't be as important if you were working with a brand new, fresh out of the box mat that was still super sticky. So now we're ready to go ahead, take this, load it directly into our Silhouette Cameo. We're going to go ahead and line up the edge of our cutting mat along with this blue edge guideline on the actual cutter. Now we're going to press send on our computer. Okay, so the next thing that I'm going to do is cut out each of the 4 individual layers so we have them on separate pieces. So this is one where you kind of need to angle it in the light because it's pretty hard to tell where any of the cut lines are. Obviously we have it split up into kind of 4 quadrants. So now I'm going to go ahead, quickly slice through each of those. And then my next step is going to be placing some transfer tape on top of each of those and then weeding out the parts that I don't want. So for example, the first one we have is the skin stencil. It's going to be hard to see because of the cut lines, they're not that visible. I'm going to go ahead, lay transfer tape on top of there, pull it all off, and then I'm going to weed out the parts of the stencil that I don't want. So I'm going to take a larger piece of transfer tape than the vinyl sheet itself, place that over, run our squeegee tool, now here's my technique for getting that clean separation. We're gonna go ahead, flip this over, try to find the edge, and peel in a diagonal fashion. Now we have the backing removed of the vinyl, and now we're left with just the vinyl actually attached to the transfer tape. And now I'm going to quickly weed out the parts of that stencil that I do not want. You can use either these little scrapers that Silhouette Studio has, or I like to use an old airbrush needle also. And now you can see that is our skin layer stencil. So now we're just gonna go ahead and repeat those same exact steps for the 3 other colors also. You also wanna make sure you have a transfer tape that rips super easily. So I can go ahead and rip this off and get near the edges of the stencil itself. And now it's a whole lot easier for me to actually see the edges and outer ends of the stencil so I can see exactly where I'm going to be placing it. Alright, so now we're ready to go ahead and lay down our first stencil. I'm going to use the pink so you can see I've already weeded out all the portions of the stencil I don't need. All we have left is those lips, the eyebrows, and then covering up the rest of the background, the entire toe box that we want to keep that pink. So I'm going to go ahead and lay this down now. If you're wondering at all about transfer tape, I've always used the Green Star Lay Flat Classic transfer tape. Comes in a 6-inch roll, has worked perfectly fine for me for a lot of years now. A super crucial step to making sure that all of your lines are gonna come out nice and crispy is utilizing a heat gun. It's really gonna suck down that vinyl and really hold it nice and tight in place. I'm gonna quickly mask off the rest of the areas here that we're trying to keep pink also. Now you can also see we have that dot in the middle of the forehead, and this is how I'll know exactly where I'm gonna be placing the next colors of the stencil. So essentially, we're done with everything when it comes to the pink. We have it covered up. Now I'm gonna move on to our skin tone color stencil. Here's our skin tone stencil, and you'll see we've also weeded out everything on here that we don't need. And you'll see that dot right in the middle of the forehead. I'm gonna place that dot directly on the pre-existing dot from the pink layer stencil, and this way everything's gonna stay nice and lined up. So I've ripped off just enough of the transfer tape so that you guys can see our little reference point dot. What I'm trying to do is line up this dot on top of the dot that's already there. It's gonna make our job super easy. If we didn't have that, we would be playing a guessing game on where to put this. So it's gonna save you a lot of time if you go ahead and follow that reference dot idea. Place it right on top. And there we go. Okay, now we're ready to go ahead and fill all of this in with our skin tone color. Commonly not a completely blanket statement, but for the most part, about 3 coats or so. Really nice light thin coats will do the job for just about any color. Okay, now we're ready to peel back the vinyl that covered everything up so we can do our skin tone color. But it's really important that we don't peel up the vinyl that's still covering up everything that's done in that hot pink. So I always like to heat set my vinyl when I'm pulling it up, but like I said, be very careful to make sure that you're peeling up the correct vinyl. Only what we essentially have on this top layer, not the stuff underneath, still staying in place, covering up our hot pink. Okay, now that we have that color done, essentially what that is most of the actual face itself. Of course, not all of the tiny details, but that kind of skin tone color that we're going for here. Now I'm ready to move into the yellow hair portion. Here's that with the hair and our reference dot already weeded out. Okay, so same thing as before, I'm gonna try and line up that little reference dot that we've already weeded out directly on top of these. And obviously this is the top half of that really light pink color, so lining it up shouldn't be too bad. Nice and easy. All of this up here we don't really need since we want the yellow all the way up there. So if I were to potentially under tape like this or place my vinyl incorrectly, that could be bad. So in a case like this, you can kind of stretch this out a little wider to make sure we're getting full coverage of all that yellow. Alright, it's now time to peel everything back, and then we will be moving into the last and final portion, laying down all of our black. So you're probably taking a look at the current progress, hearing that we only have one more step and one more color to add, and you are probably wondering, how the heck are they going to tie this whole thing together with only one more step? Well, let's get to it. So before I lay down the black stencil, if you take a quick look at the final image that we're trying to create right here, you'll see that we have some black going on top of the pink right near the eyebrows and on the pink portion of the mouth. So on our actual image over here, I'm going to pull off the vinyl stencils that are covering up the eyebrows and the mouth where we have that hot pink underneath. This way I can get that black on top of those areas. So this is just kind of one of those times where it's kind of situation by situation. You just got to pay attention to your image and just really start to understand it, break it down, really see and understand what you're looking at. Otherwise, you might leave that pink cover down, and then once we peel all this back, I wouldn't have the black on top of the eyebrows or in the mouth, so I would have to add those details in by hand. Sometimes I like to peel off a ton of the transfer tape and leave just enough for me to see where certain shapes and colors start and stop. So you see, for example, here I have at the bottom essentially the chin. Now I'll be able to line up where the skin tone color is on my image along with my reference dot right here. All right, I think it's time to go ahead and peel back all of this vinyl and masking and see what we have underneath. Hopefully no paint peels up on camera or I'll be extremely embarrassed and you guys should never listen to anything I say, but hopefully it looks pretty cool, so let's see. So here you can see a quick little side-by-side comparison of the two images on the phone and on the toe box. Ultimately, because we're working at a very small scale, there is some additional details that I would like to go in by hand. They're not completely necessary, but just a few additional strands of hair that no program such as a stencil cutter can really pick up since they're so tiny. It can only cut such thin lines. So those tiny little things, but other than that, this is looking pretty sweet. I'm just gonna go ahead, like I said, paint in a couple additional strands of hair. Other than that, super pleased with how this came out. Give yourself a clap on the back if you made it this far. That is by far the longest tutorial we've ever had here on YouTube. If you made it all the way through, hopefully you definitely learned something new today. Multi-layer stenciling, it's just one of those weird techniques that you have to do. You have to see somebody do it start to finish. You can kind of see the steps, but until you're actually in it and see how it's done, oh boy. There's a lot to it. So hopefully you guys picked up something. I would love to see all the stuff that you guys are able to create with this technique. Feel free to send it over to us. You can shoot us a DM on Instagram. We're at DeJesus Custom Footwear. Shoot us an email, contact@dejesusinc.com. I would love to see the stuff that you guys are able to create with this technique. And this is also definitely something we will be going over during our 2-day course here in Chicago. So first link in the description for that. Thank you guys for joining us for today's video. Go ahead and give it a like. If you haven't already, at some point in this video you haven't given it a like, please help us out. Make sure you're subscribed, and we'll see you guys in that next video.